Ali raised a great question. What if you have an organization that's got all similar IDs, and the clash is going to become basically not ID so much, but definitions of whatever we're talking about, or how they're defining the concept in the word. And I reckon that's kind of like where we have a lot of work, because a lot of our organizations are very high verify and down improvise. And so you've got those, what do we mean by danger? What do we mean by right? What do we mean by correct? And all that. So I reckon that's where ID really shines. Same drive clashes, people don't expect it. Okay, Paul, I'd like to turn this workshop over to you.
All right, you can relax. Thank you, Greg. Thank you. So guys, just to introduce this topic, one of the things that was coming up a lot in our conversations with clients was they were saying, I feel like I understand the ID. And if you think about our vision is for everyone in the world to know and use their ID, not just to know it, but to use it. And so much of what we talk about helps people better understand themselves and others, and the definitions of their ID. And what's come up a lot is, how do we start to really use it? And so, as I said in the invitation, we're going to switch the focus more now onto how people really can use the ID. We're going to bring that in more to the conversation. And the first and really obvious way, I guess, is how do you use it with communication? What is it about your own ID that works for you as a communicator? Where might it trip you up? And then when you're talking to people who are similar or different to you, how do you start to use ID to factor that in? So if you're working with someone who is the opposite to you, for example, opposite in a particular drive, how do you really talk in a language that works for them without compromising yourself at the same time? And then there are so many nuances. We can talk about, just the idiosyncrasies of the 4 different drives and how you make those adjustments. We can talk about your communication strengths and how you adjust your vulnerabilities and how you adjust. We can talk about keywords that you use with different drives. So there is a lot to learn from the communication point of view. And honestly, if you only ever used your ID for 2 reasons: one, to stay in stride yourself and show up as your best self, and secondly, to use it with how you communicate with other people, just that would make for a fantastic benefit from ID. And then of course there's all the questions that come up around it. And some of you asked it in your invitation responses. I can see one here in the chat already, which I might kick off by answering that question for you, Ali. But there's just so many different parts to this. So I can see we could spend the next few months just on communication. We'll see. We'll just gauge it depending on the level of interest from you, our audience, and the ID community. So throw your questions into chat. For those of you who are new to our webinar experience, we do this every month. We have a new theme every month. And at the beginning of the month, we do a session broadly on the topic of the month. So this one is on communication. And then in 2 weeks' time, we have what we call the ID Masterclass. It's exactly the same opportunity. It's at the same time. It's free as well. It's for people who want to dive deeper into the topic. Typically, it's for the people that want to really get in either to the depths because they're coaching and consulting with ID, or they just have a really strong personal interest in their own development and they want to get into the nuances. For example, instead of talking about each ID, we talk about the combinations and the different intensities of IDs. And we often get more into the use cases where people have got specific challenges that they want to try and address on that particular topic. So let's kick off. Ali, if you're on the call, can you just maybe tell us, so I can be more specific for you, what is the ID? Are you referring to like your organization where there's a really similar specific ID, or just is it a broader generalized question? Yeah, you're on mute, Ali. I can see the lips moving, but the microphone's on mute. By the way, guys, when you do talk, if you do what Ali did and just put your ID score in your name, which you just do by right-clicking, which I'll do at the same time, it's really helpful to hear you, through your ID and to be able to respond to you very specifically that way. It's a great little protocol for those of you in a team when you're on a Zoom meeting. Just change your name so you've got your ID in there, and it's really a powerful way of keeping ID alive in your team. Ali, go for it.
Yeah, so yeah, it is a specific organization with very similar ID. I don't know whether you want the details of the organization.
No. But just what is the ID? Like, is it mostly verifiers or avoid improvisers?
It's verify. Everyone that's taken the ID bar one person is a high verifier. It's mostly authenticate, mostly completers, and mostly avoid improvise.
Okay. Thanks for sharing. So that also relates to a bunch of people on this call that I can see. There's a lot of people that have got the strong verify drive and the avoid improvise drive. And so whilst it's true, as Greg said, it's there's a lot of like-mindedness. It doesn't mean that it's going to be free of any clashes or challenges when it comes to communication. Because if you think about those of you who are a verifier, me being one of them too, one of the idiosyncrasies and the strengths of your ID is you think things through and you get really clear on, on the why and the understanding, and you get quite resolute about your position and your opinion on something. Doesn't mean that your opinion about what's right is going to be the same as another verifier who has also done the same level of thinking and processing and research and comparisons, and they've come up with their own definition of right. I'll give you a simple example. You might decide that in a team environment, it's really important that everyone be punctual. That might be your definition of right, because that's about respect. We've got to respect each other's time, and time is really important. And someone else who's a strong verifier like you, they may not have the same emphasis on punctuality. They might be like, I used to, but I've learned that, it doesn't seem to make a difference one way or another. I don't want to irritate anyone, so we need to be more casual. And they may just have a different opinion and a different definition of what's right about those meetings. Some people want to take minutes in a meeting, so we've got everything documented and recorded. And other people go, no, we don't need to be like that. It needs to be more of a conversation. Think about how people use slides. And so you can have very different definitions of what does right mean, even though you've got the same ID. And that can cause a lot of clashes, because imagine getting all these strong-willed, strong-minded people all wanting to debate. And what it breeds is an inertia, because everyone spends their time spinning on trying to prove their point to the other person rather than having a breakthrough. And that's just one example. The other is they'll give examples of examples, and it just can get into a really spinning situation. Now, the same applies to every ID, not the spinning, but if you had a room full of authenticators, a room full of completers, a room full of improvisers, there would be an upside to it and there would be a vulnerability to it. So one of the things we would say for any group, the healthiest team when it comes to communication is when you've got variety of IDs. Because then you've got people that will naturally and instinctively either throw in their different perspectives, or just even their reaction to the spinning of that verified group might provoke the verifiers to react and sort of go, oh, we're sort of going on too long, but it's not easy. It's not an automatic, everything will be fine if you've got the same ID. What have you found, Ali? Have you found that in this group? You're on mute again, Ali. You're on mute, Ali.
A lot of inertia, a lot of spinning, tail spinning, a lot of analysis paralysis. No strategy. Like, strategy is a real issue. No reflection. No, it's sort of forward thinking. So very much kind of it's stuck in that sort of process. So it's a real problem for the organization.
So the thing to know is it's not that they can't do it differently. It's not like they're stuck. But now that you know that, and that they know that about them, you can set up some ground rules for how the conversations might occur more effectively. So, for example, a time limit on a conversation. But you'll need someone who's a very strong facilitator to keep them in check. I'm sitting here in a hotel room in Singapore because I'm attending an offsite for an executive team, and I'm doing exactly what, you know, I'm talking about here today. I'm in the meeting where, and well, it's a variety of IDs, but we've set up ground rules for how the meeting will go. You know, and you say you've got 20 minutes and you get to the 20 minutes and you say to someone, your time's up, and they go, yeah, I've just got one more point, you know, and they just want to make that point, and then they want to emphasize that point. This is a verifier. They want to emphasize it, give another example. I'm like, time is up. And, you know, unless it gets really quite brutal and you stand up and sort of push them into their seat, they'll do everything they can to keep talking. So it needs really strong facilitation. And another great example with a group, or a great protocol for verifiers, is don't raise a topic unless there's a straw man or a frame for the conversation. So when people just raise something loosely, you know, and it becomes just a lot of noise of everyone's opinions, that doesn't work. But verifiers are much better if someone says, here's a topic, I've already, you know, I've thought through a lot of it, here's my framework for how I think we should go forward, and people can react to the framework. Or you say to them, I just want to speak to it, let you understand it, ask clarifying questions. We're not going to solve for it today. Then go away, have a think about it overnight, do all of that verifier reflection, and come back to tomorrow's discussion where we'll talk about any adjustments we need to make to the straw man. And then sort of making the point, we're trying to get it 80% right and go, not surgically perfect, you know. Verifiers want to get that bullseye, but if you just sort of say in our environment, 80% is the new right. And in fact, if we're spending any time beyond 80%, we're going way too slow. That, I found, has been a good strategy to keep verifiers moving forward. All right, so I haven't seen any other questions in the chat. Before I move on, I'll just invite, does anyone have any questions from what we've just been sharing that you would like to ask, or that this has provoked for you? I can see most people on mute, so if you have something, just take yourself off mute and then ask away.
I just give Ali a strategy as well. Ali,
Sure.
you've got a different ID than the rest of the team. It sounds like when you were describing them, right? And that's, I watched your smile when you said it, and I can imagine your pain. Okay, so, but you are the one that is actually the canary in the gold mine in that place, in that you're the one hearing this alignment first. You don't have a barrel you're pushing. You're feeling the energy dissipate. You're feeling the fact that we're not really getting anywhere. You're speaking up and just, sorry, can I just check, are we this? Or we just see if you can find a common direction, a common strategy, a common purpose that they're skating around, because it's going to leap out at you probably before the other ones who are, you know, got a real point they're trying to make. I reckon you'd be a real gift to the group, but you'd have to feel comfortable going, sorry, it might just be me, but are we this or are we that? And just keep giving them something to focus back on together. And you watch the room will change when they all finally agree on something. It'll be like, they'll all imagine like magic just happened, right? You're the magic.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so what I thought might be helpful to people is I've just got some slides to take us through. With these slides, just know that at the end of the webinar, when we send out the recording, we will also send out these slides. So don't worry about taking notes if it's just copying down what's on the slide. You will receive these later. And just so you know, if ever you can't make one of our webinars, if you register, you will receive the recording and the slides we use in the webinar if the topic's of particular interest to you. So just know that that's always available to you as well. So here are the things about verifiers. I'm using these to provoke the you know, the discussion today, but I'll talk to some other things as well. So that's really interesting here. I put up both the use side of the drive that goes up, as well as the drive that goes down, the avoid side of the drive at the same time, so we can talk about them and how they work together. So one of the things I found really interesting is, if you think about the verifier drive, is, you know, they think about it deeply and they want evidence and proof and examples. And the avoid verifier, even the minute the discussion starts to feel like it's interrogatory, you know, it's an interrogation for them, they just shut down. I mean, we have several people on this call that can, I'm sure, really relate to that. And what's really fascinating to me as a verifier myself is the minute you take a conversation and you put something in writing, which works for you as a verifier, it's scary to an avoid verifier because you just ramped the formality of it. You just made it a thing, you know, and instead of being able to keep it looser and sort of liberal and able to be more fluid, which is the way the avoid verifier needs to see it to be engaged in the conversation. Be careful about putting things in writing to avoid verifiers. So you might want to prepare as a verifier. Someone said in the pre-work, but how do you accommodate someone else's drive without compromising your own? So you might want to put it in writing as if you're going to send an email or as if, you know, you're going to put this note to them. But instead of then sending it to the person, you might just have it in front of you at the time you're talking to it. You know, particularly if it's on a Zoom call or something like that. Even if they could see that it's in writing, it lands way more formal. And it's one of those things that the avoid verifiers may not think to say that to you. But it's so cool for you to know that, because you think you're doing the right thing to be prepared, to be articulate, to try and be more concise, which is one of the needs of an avoid verifier. So I thought I'd think it all through and put something concise in writing to help get our conversation, you know, on track and not waffle around. I thought I was doing the right thing. And yet you can be really, it's almost, it's shutting down the avoid verify. I don't know if we've got some people on the call here who would be willing to share, particularly as avoid verifiers, what happens for you when you shift from having a verbal conversation to seeing something in writing. Maybe share what the difference is for you. Thank you, Patricia. I can see you coming in.
Yeah. So for me, and I'm a 3 in verify, when it's just having the conversation, I feel like I can contribute a lot more than when I see something in writing. It feels like a command or more solid. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just feels like, okay, it's a done deal now because it's in writing. There's no wiggle room, no opportunity to have a dialogue, a discussion, a brainstorm, and then I sometimes feel stuck.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's that, see, verifies, if you think about the way a verify works, there's all these options and then we analyze them to figure out the right thing, you know, the thing, right? So that putting it in writing is like you've arrived at the bottom of that funnel. You're at the thing. So it shuts down the avoid verify. There's nowhere to go. Yeah. So one way to address that is to also say something is in writing, just say, look, I know I put this in writing. I don't want to shut it down. This is still really liberal. You know, like I'm up for a fluid conversation. Yeah. Sorry, yeah. Patricia?
Yeah, I mean, like your initial thoughts, here's something to get us started, a springboard, so then I don't feel like it's shutting the conversation down. Right.
That's just so important. When I think about so many people on this call who are in business, you know, in teams, using this in a work context, and written communication is pervasive. If you think about how we work virtually now, and so much is done with email, or it's via, you know, Slack or WebEx or Zoom, whatever we might be using to collaborate, and it's in writing, you know, and so many people almost sometimes hide because they think, well, if I at least put it down, I don't have to sort of think off the cuff, and that makes it better for me. But inadvertently, it's not necessarily landing for the avoid verifiers in the room. Now, one other thing I'll call out, I think is really important, is asking an avoid verifier, so what do you think? You know, that's not really language that works for the avoid verifiers. What they want is they want to react. So not that they don't want to be told what to do, but if you give them something as a direction, say, well, what about we do this? Now they've got something to react to. And it's that having something to bounce off, whether it's a person, whether it's a decision, whether it's a recommendation, you know, but something to react to is the way you engage an avoid verifier. So I'm emphasizing this because one of the things I found in developing the ID was the avoid verifiers don't talk as much to their avoid verify, you know? So, but if you've got them in a team, they're generally people like Greg just pointed out with Ali, they're normally golden in a team for keeping discussions moving along. And yet the verifiers that often account for the majority can be inadvertently shutting down the very sort of asset that you also value and want to be able to use in the team. Any questions or comments there on verify?
Yeah, Paul, one of the things I wanted to add to the avoid verify, as you know, I'm married to a 2.
Still.
Yeah, still, it's a miracle. What I've noticed though is if I ask a question, this is not asking a question so I can debate the answer. It's I've asked a question, he's given me an answer. That's pretty much okay, thanks for the answer. Because otherwise you start to push them in that justify mode of communication, which isn't good.
Isn't that an interesting point? So whereas we can say here on the sheet, you know, no judgment and no interrogation, just feedback can be judgment. Because if you actually think about it, to give feedback, it means you've analyzed something, you've decided something. Even positive feedback can still be a judgment. So it's really an interesting point that, you know, this difference between the use and the avoid on the verifier side. Can we just hear from an avoid verifier on this thing about judgment? Because when someone does, to Pam's point, when you get into a conversation and you want to ask a question purely to understand, but, you know, it's like, wow, why did you do that? Or tell me, you know, not so much tell me more, that I know that it would be a right way to go about it. But if, what is it that happens that shuts you down where this judgment thing starts to occur for you? Like the minute, to me, it's like the minute there's 2 to 3 questions and we go down that path, it's like you can feel there's a shutting down. What is it that happens?
Go ahead.
I'm really listening to all of this and wanting to make it part of my experience, what's being said. But the main thing that I can say is when 2 things happen, when somebody is very strong in their opinion or being right, and it's also judgmental, it just wipes me out, because I don't feel, number one, I wasn't heard, and I don't feel like I have the opportunity to be heard because they're so strong in their delivery of their rightness.
Well said, Judy. Thank you.
And
Ali,
I was going to say, Ali was going to say something, so I don't want to jump in until Ali's done.
Oh, that's okay. Yes, you're very similar to Pam and Judy. I just think it's so interesting, that feedback or that question about how it's conveyed. And once I think as an avoid verifier, once you're shut down, you're shut down. You know, and it seems like it's like a small difference, like you said, Paul. You know, if someone says, "Oh, that's interesting, tell me more," or "Can you tell me about your thinking around that?" You know, you're open and you're still talking, but as soon as someone says, "Well, why did you do that?" Well, you know, it's then you're shut down. So that's what I was going to say.
That's a judgment word, yeah, for me.
okay.
And
Thank you. Look, so go Patricia.
Go ahead. We can move on.
No. So let's talk about the Authenticate drive, which often is referred to as the communication drive. I mean, communication is relevant for all 4 drives, but I hear a lot of people talking about this as the drive that really impacts communication. So let's talk about it. So here are some prompts for the Authenticate drive that I'll just put up here so that you can see some of the differences between the 2 of them. But I would say, and this, let's discuss this. One of the very first things that stands out between the two is one being very literal, and the other being way more implicit, and I call it the ish drive, which is my drive. So words are incredibly meaningful to an authenticator, like the exact word. What you say is what you mean. And to the avoid authenticator, it's a directional, use of the words. So when you're listening to people, even if you don't know their ID, and some people say, can you guess someone's ID? Well, you can't guess their whole ID, but it would be highly unlikely for an authenticator to say something like, look, we've had this conversation 1,000,000 times, because they haven't. They might have had it a lot, might have had it 17 times, but they wouldn't say something that wasn't actually right. So whereas to an avoid authenticate, using that example, you also don't mean 1,000,000, but you're using words that are sort of exaggerated like that to try and express the emotion behind the message as well as the message, right? So that's one of the key areas of difference. And it's really off-putting to an authenticator when they hear that level of exaggerate, or that to them, I suppose, is exaggeration. When they hear the incongruency of the words, I don't know what happens for them. Maybe some of you authenticators can describe it, but something happens, because of that incongruency. Can we talk about what happens? Who would like to share? Who's an authenticator that would like to share what occurs? Greg, you're on mute, Greg.
Yeah, I was going to let someone else talk.
Oh, I thought you put your hand up.
No, I was just, I'm laughing. But I have someone new who's an authenticate that would like to have a shot.
Yeah.
Everyone knows how I feel.
I can give it a shot. I think we tend to kind of take words a bit too seriously, I guess. We kind of look into it a bit too much deeper than what it's supposed to be. Sometimes someone may just use it loosely, but we try to analyze it too much. What is it that person really meant? And everything needs to be accurate, I think.
Well, of course, for you, Ashish, with that verified drive, you're going to analyze it more. If you were an authenticator and not a verifier, then the word's going to hit you really strongly, because you just take it at its face value. You've at least got that verified drive that sort of alongside the authenticate hears the word and then thinks about the word, But imagine if you didn't have that verified drive and you just heard the word for what it was. That would be really, can you imagine? That would be pretty challenging, right? If it wasn't on point. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and what Dan just put in chat is what I was thinking. It's not about your intentions, it's the words don't match your actions.
Right.
I actually say in my head sometimes when someone's telling me something, Paul's experiences with me, in my head I say, yeah, that may or may not be true. They're telling me this thing, but I don't take it as true. I take it as an indication of where the truth might be laying. It's an electron in an orbit somewhere, but it's not where he's saying it is. Right? And I think it's good for me because it makes me stay in question longer and helps me not come to a conclusion so quickly. Because otherwise I'm gonna go to the bottom line and get to the point and all that really quickly. But I'm going, yeah, there might be more here. And it's taken me a while, but I'm getting better at waiting, staying stupid longer.
Thank you, Greg. So one of the things I would suggest as a way to use the ID for the authenticators is if you've got a challenging conversation to have with someone who's an authenticator, go for a walk or have that conversation while they're being physically active. There's something that happens between the mind and the body that for an authenticator, when they're being active, it's again, if you guys who are authenticators can explain it, it's like you engage more easily or can stay engaged for longer. But when there's a doing occurring at the same time as the conversing, it's a much better way for an authenticator to engage.
Mhm. Very
Would you
true.
say that's true, Patricia? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and my husband's an 8, and so it's even, I mean, we can sit in the car and not say a word the whole time we're riding in the car because we're not doing anything. And then,
Right.
but if we're out walking or, out on the, doing something more physical, then we tend to open up and have a lot more deeper conversations. Although I'm more
Right.
of I'm a surface dweller when it comes to deep conversation.
Right. So how can people do it then? I'm sure people are sitting here saying, well, how do you do that when we're on a Zoom call with someone? How can you make it so that someone is, an authenticator is more engaged? Like how do you create the physicality when you are sitting on a screen? How do you do that?
Give them a task, give them something to do. That's what I do for myself is I have my brightly colored pens that I keep and I take notes. I may never even use the notes, but I have to be doing something when I'm on a call to keep myself engaged. And so I give myself a task to do.
Okay. Now, on the other hand, if you want to connect with the avoid authenticators, the point I'd make there is connection is crucial. They need to feel a sense of, that you get them, that you get them at a deeper level, like at a philosophical level, at a values level. You know what they care about, some of their history. You've taken the time to get to know them a little bit. When an avoid authenticator feels that someone really is on their wavelength and is almost bothered to take time to understand, like what, and the word that I would say connects for me is the word really. Like if you said to me, how was your weekend? That's one answer. I could give you a superficial answer. But if you said to me, Paul, how was it really for you? Like that meeting, how did you find that? How did you really find that meeting? And it denotes that someone wants to know the depth of the answer, not just a superficial answer, because avoid authenticators like to get into the depth. But it's going to be a lot easier if you feel like there's been some time where someone connects with you first. Like, tell me a little bit about your family, tell me about how you felt in that situation. So the more you get into feelings, values, philosophy, it doesn't need to be a long-winded conversation. It could still be relatively short, but they need to have that sense of personal connection with you before you get into the work conversation or the thing, whatever the thing is you want to then discuss and resolve. Get a personal connection, get a relationship occurring first. And that's one of the key differences in this drive, that for the avoid authenticators, they need to have the relationship with you to then get into the work. For the authenticators, they typically want to get into the work, and through the work, we'll build a relationship. That's the difference. Any questions? If someone's watching the chat, it's a bit hard for me to keep my eye on the chat. So if someone sees anything in the chat that we should speak to, maybe you could call it out for us, please.
The other thing that I would really just call to attention is, especially with this drive, a lot of people think they have an agreement because they had a discussion, and make sure that you are understanding what you're agreeing to between the two of you, because I think that's where a lot of misunderstandings can happen.
And how would you do that, Pam?
Just
how
to
would you do that?
clarify, ask for clarity. So if I'm hearing you, this is what you want me to go and do, to make sure that both of you understand, because an authenticate will hear things as actionable and they'll go and do, and a avoid authenticate will be conceptualizing and still talking about moving furniture.
So paraphrasing back to somebody, what you believe has just been said is an essential thing to do for the authenticate drive, and therefore for communication, because everyone falls somewhere on that drive. And so if you want to have, particularly on a contentious topic, if you want to make sure that, so we are in agreement or we are aligned, it's so important to paraphrase it back. And in doing that, you'll probably find that you weren't, that there's something missing until you do that little exercise.
And there's a little bit for use authenticates. if you could pick up a few words and use the same word, that really helps too, because that creates the rapport. A person will feel heard if you're using, when you're clarifying, you're using the same word.
That's a great point, Pam. That's a great point. You remind me of when someone gets up in a meeting, you know, you've got like a team meeting occurring, and someone gets up to keep notes of the team, put up the action items on a flip chart or something for the team. It really is frustrating to me when I see people putting up different words to what has been said in the room. Even though I'm an avoid authenticator, I can see immediately a disconnect occurring between what the person said and what the person captured, because when later we go to play it back, what's going to be understood in the team won't actually correlate to the point that was made in the first place. So I think that's such an important point, is to capture, and even play back. When you capture the point, play back, is that what you meant? And often when a person sees it, because sometimes written communication is lands differently to verbal, then it gives room for someone to say, actually, that's not what I said, you know? Even though I said that, what I can now see how people reacted, I need to clean that up. And this is the point I'm really trying to make. So that's that paraphrasing point. It's so important. The other thing I would say on that, to Ali, when you said about this team culture that you work with, where there's a lot of authenticators, for a meeting to be valuable for a group of authenticators, there needs to be action at the end of it. There's got to be a set of to-dos. No matter how valuable you might think the meeting was, because you covered your agenda, you shared the problems, you know, unless there are actions, and specifically actions for them to do, then the meeting in many ways for them was a waste of time. So, you know, have a look at either before or during the meeting, if you've got the authenticators in the room, what are the actions that you're going to be determining, and what of those actions can you assign to them? Because then they'll walk out feeling like that was really valuable. So important. Actions, and actions assigned to the people to do. All right, let's move on to the complete drive. So the thing with completers is completers are the ones that have always got their plan and they're working their plan, which means they're always in the middle of something. So no matter when you want to approach a completer to have a conversation and communicate with them, whether it's verbal, whether it's an email, it is always interrupting them. So just showing respect for that is really important to them. It doesn't mean you can't interrupt them. And they would actually say to you, please don't interpret you can't interrupt me. I want you to come and, you know, interrupt me in as much as I want to serve you, because harmony is the driver for the completer. So they want to help you. They want to support, they want to be in service of you. And yet the twist on it is, and when you come to take advantage of that, you're going to be interrupting them, and that's not where they're at their best necessarily. But what I've found is, if you just acknowledge it, if you just say to them, you know, when you finish what you're doing, and just the acknowledgement, the appreciation, the respect of showing or approaching that way lands so much better for a completer. And then they can very quickly find a spot to just, you know, put a line on the page, as it were, that they can come back to and start again from where they left off. It might, I'm saying that metaphorically, it might be that they just quickly finish a task. Like, let's say they're in the middle of, you know, filing a whole lot of work, and you go and interrupt them. They just finished that particular file. So they haven't finished the whole task, but they can just sort of do something to see, you know, keep a notice to where they've left off. That's really important in how you approach the completers. Now, of course, if you've made an appointment with them and it's 4 o'clock that you have agreed to get together, then that's a little different, because that's part of their plan. And to the extent that you can schedule things and give advance notice, that is beautiful for a completer. It could be as simple as me saying, so I'm going to start on this point about the complete drive, but in a minute, Karen, I'm going to ask you a question about how you're reacting or what you think of that drive, you know, and just the fact, you know, it's coming allows you to just regroup and get to a point where you can, when you then get asked the question, it's not as abrupt as what it would have otherwise been. How do you feel about that, Karen?
You nailed it, Paul.
Yeah.
You nailed it. I'm delighting in this. I didn't realize how strong I was in this area, even after having my number, my ID. And now I work with all of you and I can see it shining through. And especially that can be challenging when it's awesome that I work remote and I have control of my schedule, right? For the most part. But then there's, we have, our version of emergencies, or this is needed in 30 minutes. And, I've had to develop strategies to, and this ties into my avoid improvise. I leave time in my day expecting that I'm going to be thrown off track. Just so that use authentic, so the use complete doesn't control me so much, right?
That's exactly right. And that's a great strategy to, I know there are people that say when so-and-so's in the office, when my boss is in the office, I don't plan the same amount of work as what I normally would do because I allow room for those interruptions and the changes that invariably occur. Now, if you are then communicating with an avoid complete person, they, it says here, make it brief, right? They want to keep it brief because the boredom sets in pretty quickly. But the thing to remember is don't get into the how. The minute you start talking about how something needs to be done, they don't want that. You've just lost them the minute you start talking, unless it's something they've asked for. Like imagine if you said to someone, where's the restaurant we're going to for dinner, right? You might say, we're going to the Northern Star. That's the name of the restaurant. Now, if that's all they wanted, if you start saying to them, so what you got to do is you go down this road and then you take a left and then you have the first set of lights, they're not hearing a damn thing of what you just are going on about, right? They've already moved on. They got the Northern Star shut down. They'll figure the rest out themselves. They'll put it into an app or they'll just go and figure it out. But the figuring it out themselves is the driver of the avoid complete. And I remember my mum was a completer, the 17 complete. God bless you, mum. And she would, and I'd say, Mum, I don't need all the detail. And she would still go through it all. And we would just laugh because, she could see what was happening, but she needed to do it. I think it was being the mum. And I just couldn't follow it. And even if I understood it, I'd probably take a different way or something, just so that I didn't follow the plan that, had been outlined. But that's the thing to keep in mind for the avoid completes. All right, with that, let's talk about the improvised drive. So the improvisers are the ones that want things to be upbeat and positive and exciting and, high impact, the back against the wall, pulling the rabbits out of the hats. We've studied anything about the idea, we know that's the drive. And then for the avoid improvised people, they're the ones that like things to be safer, take the risk out of it. So when it comes to communication, this is a really interesting drive too, because a conversation is risky. It doesn't matter what it's about. It's a conversation, which means it's happening in the moment. And that's got risk all over it. Like whatever you're going to hear, you're hearing it for the first time, you're reacting off, on the spot. I mean, anything like that is challenging for the avoid improvised person. And even if you make it incredibly safe, like you're having this conversation with your spouse who loves you, who cares about you, or with one of your kids where you feel entirely safe, there is still a risk. There's a risk, depending on the rest of your ID, of how they might react. There's a risk that the words that you use don't land the way you intended for them. There's a risk that you don't even express the right words, because you're so emotional about it. There's still risk. a conversation equals risk. And that's something to be very aware of for those of us who use improvise. It's really good to be aware of just a conversation in itself. It can be unsettling and concerning to an avoid improvise person. Now, I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear from an avoid improvise person on, are there conversations where you do feel entirely safe? Or is there a certain dynamic that lets you feel that? Of course, you can still have a conversation, but one of the things that happens for the avoid improvise is there's often follow-up conversations that are then needed, because when probably the safest space is in the quietness of your own mind, that when you can then just, percolate on something and get your thoughts together on it and then be able to react again, then that is where you feel safest, So providing firstly as much as you can of the safe space, and then the quiet time, either for yourself or give that to an avoid improviser to let it just be, is so important for how they can then. So even in a conversation, Patricia, you mentioned in the car, it can be quiet. There are so many wonderful conversations that happen in a car between, in a family or in a relationship, because often on a journey, there can be something said, and then there can be some quiet time. And then something can be said, and there can be some quiet time. And in that quiet time, it's not that there's no conversation occurring. There might be no verbal conversation occurring that anyone can hear, but for the avoid improviser, there can be a ton occurring in their head, like they're thinking this thing through. And they're having I wouldn't use the word party, but they're having a lot going on, So one of the things I'd say to the avoid improvisers is you need to let the person know that you're just processing it. Because to an improviser, that silence is deadly. They feel like you've just shut down on them. They feel like they've said something that might have offended you. And it's really a negative for them. Silence is like a negative. What's not negative is when you say to them, I heard you. I just need some time to think about this. So I'm just going to be quiet for a little bit. That's really positive to an improviser, because they now know that something is happening from what's being discussed. They know that you're going to come back with something else in a minute, or they can ask another question or have a little bit more discussion in a minute. But the silence then isn't that nothing is occurring and there's no shutdown. So it's so important to an avoid improviser. Please take the time. Every improviser wants you to have that time to process, but just let them know that that's what you're doing. Otherwise, it's very quickly misinterpreted. Does anyone have anything to share about the safety element in a conversation? Is there an avoid improviser who can maybe speak to that to help the rest of us understand what does safety and low risk look like? Or is it always a risky feeling having a conversation?
One thing that's helpful, especially in meetings, is if there's some concept of what's going to be discussed, so like an agenda shared beforehand, so that you can gather your thoughts in that quiet space before entering the conversation even.
Great point, Megan. Great point. Anybody else?
Yeah, I suppose I'm an avoid improviser, but I'm okay with improvisation, and I appreciate the powers of those who have it. As long as in my world, I try to make sure that the improving and the changing of the plans are deliberate as opposed to haphazard. So
Right.
the safety element of knowing that we can talk about this before we just change the direction of the ship, and make sure
Yeah.
that it's a deliberate change, makes it then acceptable to someone like me who might naturally avoid changing the plan at all costs.
Well said, Brad. Well said. So over the last few years, this term psychological safety in a team environment has become really quite prevalent, right? And I would say it's true everywhere. It's not just for work environments, for avoid improvise people especially. you can see now why people who are risk averse, for them to be able to engage in the team and specifically in conversations, there's got to be this feeling of psychological safety. It will be different for everyone because everyone brings their different onion skins of life history and past experiences to the table. Other drives too need psychological safety. You know, it's not only the avoid improvisers. Now, for example, an improviser, if we take the opposite drive, if they feel that they're going to get, you know, into a debate that's all negative, a lot of judgment, and that their freewheeling thinking and ideas are just going to get shut down, that doesn't feel very psychologically safe to them either. If a verifier feels like they've got their opinions, but they get ridiculed for sharing their opinions because they're different to everyone else's, that won't feel very psychologically safe. So it's a really important concept when it relates to communication, but it's specific, it's sort of ramped up even more for the avoid improvise drive. So keep that in mind when, given that so many of the teams we see are avoid improvisers, a lot of avoid improvisers on them, taking the time and working through with the team, what do we need to create that safety each time we come together is really an important thing you could do. Now that you know about ID, it's a great gift you could bring to that team. Guys, I can see we're out of time already on this topic. We'll dig deeper into use cases on using ID for communication when we get together again 2 weeks from now in our ID Masterclass. So with that, I'd like to wish you a really great day. Enjoy the rest of it. Be productive. Hopefully you can use some of the things we've just talked about today. Let us know how that's working or not working when we see you next time. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Paul. And for those of you that are still on the call, don't forget we've got ID certification coming up in a few weeks' time in the US. So if you want to learn, really dive deep, reach out to me and I'll get you some information on that. Thanks, everyone.